ice age, so I don't know.
But it's dramatically accelerated even in the last couple of decades.
Possibly. It's not so obvious. I spent quite a bit of time going through the relevant literature. I read about 200 books on ecological, what would you call it, on ecology and economy when I worked for the UN for about a 2-year period, and it's not so obvious what's happening just by the complex system. The problem I have fundamentally isn't really a climate change issue. It's that I find it very difficult to distinguish valid environmental claims from environmental claims that are made as what would you call it, secondary anti-capitalist front, essentially. So it's so politicized that it's very difficult to parse out the data from the politicization.
So I saw there's a line in 12 Rules which says people stricken with poverty don't care about carbon dioxide.
Yeah, that's definitely the case.
And I think that's not an unreasonable point to make, because you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? People, if you can't eat, then actually you can't really worry about what's happening in 50 years to the planet. However, I don't think that's a reason not to tackle climate change, because those same people in the global south...
It's part of the reason.
Is it though? Because people in the global south...
Coal-generated plants stop people from starving. So yes, it's partly a reason. And it's certainly the case that making energy more expensive, obviously, makes things more difficult for poor people. So yes, it's definitely an issue. And I would say, it's kind of a conundrum for those on the left. It's like, what's it going to be? Clean air or hungry people? Like, well, we don't have to choose. It's like, okay.
Or renewable energy, or
good luck with that.
Or nuclear power.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look like we're moving in that direction very fast.
No, but that is a solution. They want to do something kind of close to the national religion in Britain. So there's a bit where you say population control advocates, like if you compare them to Eric Harris, one of the Columbine killers. Why then is it virtuous to propose that the planet might be better off if there are fewer people on it? And I find that completely boggling, that you have elided their population control through people not being born and the mass slaughter of people who are already alive.
It's the motivation that I question.
Right, tell me more about that.
Well, what kind of statement is the planet would be better off with fewer people on it? First of all, there's an easy solution to that. You can leave.
Unfortunately, much the best efforts of Elon Musk, that is not yet an option permanently.
That's what I meant, yes. If you're very concerned about your carbon footprint, there's a very fast solution to that. So, and I think it's disingenuous to, well, it's the other people, or maybe it's the people who haven't been born yet. Like, this is also the problem I have with much of the environmentalist movement, is there's a powerful stream of anti-human sentiment that motivates it, and masquerading under the guise of virtue on a planetary scale. It's like, could be. I mean, it's not like we're not fouling our own nest,
But that's why I'm fascinated by where you come from, is because the book, is so much about things being balance and harmony, right? And order and chaos outweigh each other. Well, what overpopulation has done is got to the same.
Who says we have overpopulation?
Well, I think that it's very difficult to see under the current model of fossil fuel-based capitalism. Sorry to use that word. I know it upsets you. But
that is what
until we've run out of fossil fuels.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Well, it will happen.
Yeah.
Because
people have been saying that's going to happen for 50 years, and now the United States is a net exporter of fossil fuel.
Right.
And so no one saw that coming, did they? But it happened.
And you're right, that might be the case, but at the moment I would say that China is putting up new coal-fired power stations, by the bucket load. It is entirely possible that the stuff that developed nations did, that now developing nations did, now doing great themselves richer.
Concerned about clean air when it's richer. That's what the data is. Once you get GDP up to about $5,000 per year, people start to become concerned with environmental issues. So
that might happen too late, right?
I don't think so. It'll happen too late for some things. It looks like we're going to top out at about $9 billion. I think we can handle that. I think probably one of the problems that will beset us in 100 years, assuming there are even creatures like us around in 100 years, is that there'll be people the projections pop out at about 9 billion. It's only 2 billion more than we have now. But there's every reason to assume that we can cope with that, especially given the rapid decreases in poverty around the world at the moment. There's a bit of a bottleneck. There'll probably be some more extinction. What we're doing to the oceans by overfishing them is serious. But we've only been aware of our role as planetary species since 1960. We're not going to do that. context of the fact that we actually have a force. And I don't think that we're overpopulated. I think all the arguments that all the neighbors arguments in the 1960s, were like overpopulation bombs to get to mass starvation by the year 2000. It is absolutely and completely wrong.
And we've been very lucky with things like golden rice, for example, genetic engineering of crops. And it's not wrong. Well, yeah, it is. I agree that human ingenuity is a huge part of that, definitely.
Right, well, then more ingenuity. And Bjorn Lomberg, who I really admire, the skeptical environment.
Why?
Who's actually going very long ways to try and figure out what you can do at a planetary level that would actually be useful and productive.
You want to switch TV to this and not actually get my TV?
No, I'm fine.
Cessation.
That's stupid. No, it's not. My TV is bigger than
Lasts longer. That one's going to last longer. Just by the plasma it has.
One more area.
Just by the LED backlights it has. Larger TVs seem to burn out quicker.
Studies on that. What do you think might be the adverse effects of having same-sex
How
parents?
come our TV downstairs doesn't burn?
Well,
We had that for over 10 years.
And we've had that one for over 10 years. Way over 10 years.
Optimal for children.
I think we got
That's
those
what
at
it
the
is.
same time.
I suspect.
What happened to the last TV that was downstairs? And how big was it?
Suspect.
That's because it's
No.
big and like the back part was big. And I think that was a problem.
That was a plasma TV.
What exposure
It ran out of
role
plasma.
models is necessary.
Bigger TVs require more power from the light.
So the TV the old TV that was downstairs was so 32 inches. And it didn't last. I'm pretty sure it's probably the brand anyway. That would be the good brand.
So far, that's all the good. There were a couple that were that show property.
Well, that was like the 2004 TV. 2004. I did like that TV though because you were able to do picture-in-picture on
I
that.
believe it was a question like if there was a
I
problem.
don't know how to do picture-in-picture on utility
Something like
TVs,
that.
but picture-in-picture is
Well, I mean,
supposed to be very, very common, so I cannot do
conservative
picture-in-picture
case
on.
for gay marriage, I think.
Because it's not common no more.
Motivated to make a conservative
I
argument.
mean,
David
it's something
Cameron,
you could
former
do
Prime
on your
Minister, said
phone.
I support gay marriage because I.
You can picture-in-picture on your phone.
It's obviously
Where you
homosexuality
could just stream something on YouTube or watch something on YouTube and then have it in the corner of your screen and then
also
play games.
what's the appropriate social response to that? Conceivably.
Like that TV didn't have it. I don't know if yours did. I never really tried it on this TV or my TVs. I don't know if they actually have a picture-in-picture. They probably don't.
What's the consequence of that for children in those families? I don't know. Well, I mean, what I would say is, well, the obviousness is that there's no one else
Especially if I want to watch cable at the same time
doesn't
as
take
watching. I'm playing the game.
It doesn't take the perception of genius to come up with the observation that that might be a problem. Now, maybe it's not. And my suspicion
I used to
is
call
that
it PIP because
far
I didn't know
more
what
relevant
PIP stands
problems
for.
with
It
regards
stands
to
for picture-in-picture.
what happens to children that isn't children.
I used to always call it PIP.
So this is a way in which, that is now research 20 years ago, that would have been anathema to mainstream.
Well, people were concerned with the deterioration of marriage and believed that the addition of
When they were downstairs, I thought
and I think that's not given how weak it's become. And I don't think that that's been good for people overall.
Okay, let's talk about free speech to finish on. You wrote in a book about Nietzsche, who became the Nazis' favourite intellectual, and you also talk about a professor.
Only through this system of mistranslations of this word.
Right, but you talk a little bit as well about another professor whose ideas you sort of led in the Maoris at least. I don't know if you're more worried about what his ideas. Do you worry about where where your work might be taken and used by other people? I see you posing with
I worry about that all the time.
with a Pepe flag.
I can't believe you brought that up.
Right, but I just think it's
Seriously, I can't believe you brought that up. You should go online.
Yeah. I do.
There's
Believe me, I do.
There's a video called, I think it's called "Is Jordan Peterson a Darling of the Alt-Right?" Have you watched the video of the person who put up that peppy flag with me? It's online.
But I have watched it. I have seen. You wouldn't. I would say.
And why are you concerned about peppy flags? Jesus, he disappeared like 3 years ago. And most of that was sold by young guys who were trying to drag the media into idiot accusations like the idea that this was a white supremacist gesture, which I was asked about on CBC. Like, no, it wasn't. It was Fortran trolls playing the media for fools, which were much of the peppy thing was that as well.
Okay, well, the problem with people ironically pretending to be Nazis on the internet.
They weren't pretending to be Nazis.
But no, this is a separate phenomenon, and the 4chan definitely do ironically pretend to be all the worst things they can possibly be. Is that some people take that very seriously. There was a case in America recently of a guy who stabbed his father because he had thought that his father was a Democrat. He was writing stuff for a conservative website. He got very into the Pizzagate conspiracy theory.
He was probably paranoid.
Right, so there are people who take this very, very seriously and they latch onto it.
What's the point?
I'm saying that, how much responsibility do you feel you have to teach guys the alt-right, as you say? Some of them have enjoyed your work, and so I'm not one of you guys. I'm not one of you guys.
They haven't enjoyed my work.
I've definitely read bits on the internet.
Read more.
Okay.
Find some evidence. I'm extraordinarily sick and tired of this particular accusation / line of questioning. I'm no fan of the identitarian right, the ethno-nationalists, the alt-right, the alt-right, the ethno-nationalists, and what's
I think people who are on the right that have got their powers outside the traditional.
I give up. I'm done.
That's a pretty loose definition
Through that
of the
strain
alt-right.
of Rush Limbaugh kind of talk radio, right? People who see themselves in opposition to the
Rush
establishment.
Limbaugh is not the alt-right. He's been around for 30 years.
Right, so he's the progenitor of what I see now in Breitbart and things like that, are the new media versions of that very old media.
Well, let's define what constitutes alt-right first. For me, they're ethno-nationalists. They tend to be white supremacists.
I'm going back to 2K
and
after
generally,
this.
when people tar me with an alt-right epithet, the reason they're doing that is to associate me with those people. They don't like me. And the reason for that is that I've made it very clear, not only in my videos, but on Twitter, that I don't like them. I don't like their anti-Semitism. I don't like their use of identity politics. I don't agree with their age. I think that their notion is something like, well, if everybody's going to play identity politics, we're going to play it too, and we're going to win. And I can certainly understand that motivation, but I think it's a bad game all around. And I think the only reason that I was ever associated in any sense whatsoever with anything to do with the alt-right was because it was extremely convenient of the radical leftists, who I fundamentally detest, to paint me as a representative of that viewpoint.
Right.
Other than that, zero. Now,
but that's not what I did, you say, so at no point did I say you were...
Well, you brought up the whole thing.
Right, but I did bring it up, but there was a reason I did that, which is that Nietzsche himself said I'm an anti-Semite, right? And yet his ideology and his philosophy ended up being used by the Nazis. So my question to you is, how much responsibility do you feel about the way in which
what I
the
feel.
world
It's
is
not
used?
how much responsibility I feel. It's how much responsibility I take. Right. And I take as much responsibility as I possibly can. Right. Which is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm going around the world, I'm talking to different cities, I'm talking to people as much as I can. I'm putting out content that I think is useful for people online, and I'm clarifying what I think. I have 300 videos on YouTube. Virtually, for all intents and purposes, every single word I've said to students in a professional capacity since 1992. And despite the fact that I have innumerable, highly motivated enemies, they haven't been able to find one thing I've said in 30 years that, what would you say, justifies any of those accusations, or any other accusations for that matter. So it's quite the phenomenon. I mean, I understand it to some degree, because...
So, sorry, about the Pepe flags, can you help me explain, why did you pose with it? What were your reasons for doing it? Did people just come up and bring it to you and
Yeah, it was like posing with... I've probably been photographed with, I don't know, 5,000 people in the last 2 years. And, it's one after the other, often in groups of 100, 150, or 200 people. And it's like 15 seconds.
Right.
And they brought this flag. One of them had spoken at the event. They were doing it ironically. They unfurled the flag, and we took a picture, and that was that.
Would you have posed ironically with a hammer and sickle flag?
I don't know under the circumstances what I would have done. I have all sorts of Soviet art in my house.
Right. Because I think anybody could get caught out, and social embarrassment is a huge factor, and you don't want to kind of tell people who've been very nice to you that actually you don't want to do the thing. I just wonder if that's something that you regret now, that you wouldn't do again if you had the opportunity.
Well, I don't think it did me any good. I don't think I'll betray my former self. We'll just leave it where it is. I made the decision that I made under the circumstances and took what was there into consideration. I think that the peppy formulators did a wonderful job of trolling the standard media. I don't think that they were what everyone presumed them to be.
I think they did a wonderful job of trolling you as well, in a sense, right? Recruiting you and your image and your appeal to people to their kind of cause, which is ironic.
I don't really think so.
It's not actually, underneath it all, I don't find it very ironic, actually.
What don't you find ironic?
But a lot of the kind of fortune culture, which is saying, I'm just going to say the worst possible thing that I can say just to prove that I can say it because free speech is still alive, I think that in itself is quite poisonous to the discourse. I think I try and conduct myself online in a relatively civilised manner. I do not always succeed, but I do not think just going into a room and screaming epithets is something that I need to do on a daily basis to prove that free speech isn't dead, right?
I think we probably agree that that's a reasonable...
A rare note of consensus. But I have to come back to the free speech idea, because I think that whole idea of the intellectual dark web, and this came up a couple of times at your event on Thursday, is predicated on the idea that you have been marginalised for your opinions, or oppressed for your opinions.
It's predicated on my claim of that.
Right. It's predicated on...
I don't know. I'm not claiming I've been marginalised. I would never use that word, first of all. That's for sure.
So the idea of dark...
I don't feel impressed.
But I do think that the way that you got the cheers from that crowd was very much about...
Damn! Heal, there we go.
But I'm going to say it anyway, that hard work is the way to succeed. And I thought that was fascinating, because to me you don't look like somebody who has particularly suffered an outrageous amount for your opinions. People certainly disagree, they've been rude, in some cases.
The only reason I haven't suffered an outrageous amount for my opinions is because I've handled the consequences of their utterance exceptionally well. My job was at risk, my family's stability was at risk. So I wouldn't push that one too far.
And what way was your job at this?
Jesus. Last year, 200 of my faculty members signed a petition to get me fired. That was only one of a dozen things that happened. University wrote me 2 letters, cease and desist letters from their HR departments with their legal staff. 3 of those needed done. They just fired Rick Maida in Canada at Canadian University for talking about many of the same things that I talked about. So the fact that I've come through this relatively unscathed has very little to do with the vitriol of the attacks. There was plenty of motivation to take me out, it just didn't work.
Right, and I think the fact that it didn't work, to me, makes me optimistic about how we are, because that's what I don't have to do. I can't know, a while ago we found